Is this recent violence just about this verdict, this death sentence, or is there more to it than that?
I don't believe that it's just about the death sentence. I think that that's just a cover. The evidence has been very clear ever since the uprisings in Egypt began 2 years ago, that you have Western intelligence services, namely the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, and other groups who've been on the ground now for years, since the year that Barack Obama was elected president in 2008. And they have basically been there training people on forms of nonviolent protest. And so while it is very possible, I say that in a very slim sense, that this could be something that is a grassroots thing, in general, the plan is to keep these countries destabilized and difficult to find their footing, because they're much easier to manage in an atmosphere such as that.
All right, you're talking about Western and exterior forces here at play, but what about what's happening in the way the authorities are dealing with this crisis at the moment? Thousands of soccer fans have actually expressed overwhelming support for that verdict, which seems to be a catalyst now for what's going on with this rioting and death. What does it tell us about the divisions in Egyptian society, where we see supporters there in Cairo and those people are actually risking their lives and dying over this verdict in Port Said?
Yes, and as I said, I will not for a moment discount not just the possibility, but the likelihood that you have people on the ground there who are genuinely emotionally driven for these things. But, you know, these kinds of revolutions, they don't pop up just overnight. They take years of planning and years of all sorts of preparations in order for these things to take place. And yes, there's a lot of frustration on the streets in Egypt. They have just gone through a very turbulent period where unemployment is very high. It's very difficult for families to feed themselves, and certainly this lends to the frustration on the street. So, but in general, I cannot help but to think back to the hundreds of news reports that were coming out of Egypt, many of which were covered on RT and other Western media outlets, talking about how you had troublemakers on the ground there who were being directed and guided by Western intelligence services. Now,
but I just must ask you then, why are we not seeing much support now for the protesters or any Western influence, or perhaps there could be, as you may say, at what's happening now? Because obviously Western nations, the US, supported that revolution 2 years ago. Now we're seeing the protesters in the streets. What are they doing now? We're not hearing much from them.
Yes, that's right. And the United States and the West don't have to come out and support these people who are on the street. Just having it happen so that it can put pressure on Morsi and on his government in order to agree to certain demands that the United States and Israel are making. The U.S. doesn't necessarily have to come forward and say, oh, yes, we're in support of these people. The name of the game here, I believe, is just an issue of putting pressure on Morsi. Perhaps he and his government are beginning to veer in a certain direction that is not pleasing to the United States and to Israel.
And is that because of the Muslim dominance there, Mark? Is that because obviously there is a huge worry now amongst the Egyptians that the Islamists are taking over the country, it's being dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood, and also is that something that should worry the US and the Western states who, after all, helped this revolution?
No, the United States is not worried about this because Egypt is already on the hook in the form of Western financial aid and Western military aid. And in that regard, Egypt is perfectly well safe within the hands of the West in that regard. So they are not worried about Islamists coming to power. No matter what happens, as long as Egypt has to feed at the trough of the International Monetary Fund and to get her military support from the United States, Egypt will be a completely pliant player and will do whatever she is told to do.
Mark, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us live here on RT.